as we come on the air, we are following breaking news headlines as it relates to President-elect now, Donald Trump, and international conflict. Take a look at your screen. What does a second Trump presidency hold in store for Israel and Ukraine? The world unsure this morning of what to expect from the former president turned president-elect's America First foreign policy. Fox News correspondent C.B. Cotton joining us now to explain.
As President-elect Trump prepares for a second term in the White House, questions remain about exactly how he'll handle the continuing wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. This week, Trump spoke with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in what a senior Ukrainian official described as a, quote, very good call. Throughout his campaign, Trump voiced skepticism about continuing U.S. support for Ukraine, raising some concerns across Europe that he would abandon them in their fight.
The key thing is to support Ukraine and help them push back the Russians. Otherwise, stability in Europe, in the transatlantic area, no small country in Eastern Europe will be safe.
Saturday, an EU representative visited Kyiv to show support. Some Republicans are calling for the EU countries to take on a larger role.
In terms of defending Ukraine for the long run, Europe needs to truly step up. If they're not going to do it now, with World War III on their doorstep, when are they?
Meanwhile, in the Middle East, Israel sees Trump's victory as their own. Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also spoke this week. The Israeli leader previously called Trump, quote, the best friend Israel has ever had in the White House. Israel is now fighting Hamas and Hezbollah on multiple fronts. Both groups are funded by Iran. Israeli officials say cutting off that support should be the priority.
All the problems we have today in the Middle East, it all comes from Tehran.
Hamas issuing its own statement earlier this week saying Trump must, quote, work seriously to stop the war in the Gaza Strip. In New York, C.B. Cotton, Fox News.
CB, thank you so much for that detailed report. And as we further discuss President-elect Donald Trump, along with international conflict, right now giving you a live look at the Israel-Gaza border. At this hour, conflict with Israel and Hamas as does loom. We're learning this Sunday that Qatar suspended its key mediation efforts between Hamas and Israel. This after growing frustration with the lack of progress on a ceasefire deal for Gaza. Joining us live this morning to further discuss this breaking news alert, it's Ken Gray. He's the Distinguished Lecturer in Terrorism and Homeland Security with the University of New Haven. Ken, good morning to you. Always a pleasure having you join us bright and early here on Live Now from Fox.
Good morning, Janae. Glad to be with you again.
So a lot to dissect. We can start off with President-elect Donald Trump. If we look back in recent months, specifically at the presidential debate leading up to the presidential election, we've heard from world leaders throughout that time saying that respect is top of mind when they think of President-elect Donald Trump and international conflict. Could you set the stage for us as that relates to the current Biden-Harris administration and their response?
Sure. So the Biden-Harris administration has been supportive of Zelensky in Ukraine and somewhat supportive of Israel there, of Netanyahu and Israel. But Donald Trump, President-elect Donald Trump, throughout the campaign said that he would settle the war in Ukraine even before he takes office. And as to Israel, I am sure that he will not hold the same restrictions on Israel's activities, both in the Gaza Strip and against Hezbollah and against Iran, that the Biden administration was holding. And so I expect to see both the Ukraine war come to an end quickly, and I expect to see the limitations on Israel removed and allow them to settle things quickly, too.
Absolutely. And we know that world leaders have not held back with their comments, some of them saying that the conflicts in their region wouldn't have even happened or started if President-elect Trump was in office. I want to get your professional opinion and expertise as this relates to NATO, because there are concerns this morning as it relates to President-elect Trump and his disdain for NATO as it relates to world leaders coming together to respond to international conflict, as we are seeing with Israel in real time.
Sure. So you know that President Trump, when he was in office before, was trying to force the other NATO members to accept the financial burden of supporting NATO. He said the United States was the one who was fully funding NATO, and that it was time for those other countries to step up and provide funds themselves. We've seen now with the war in Ukraine that NATO has been providing more and more weapons to Ukraine throughout this period. And so he had some influence on them even after he had left office. But if the United States pulls back on this as far as support of Zelensky there in Ukraine, then NATO will have to, the rest of the NATO members will have to decide if they want to go it alone, if they want to continue supporting Ukraine in their fight with Russia, or if they want to go ahead and find a peaceful settlement there between Russia and Ukraine in their present battleground positions.
Very interesting point you bring up this Sunday, Ken, because obviously Ukraine entering those winter months, and we know that's a pivotal time as it relates to that war. So I'm very glad you did mention that. Getting back to conflict as it relates to Israel and Hamas, we are knowing there are growing frustrations out in Qatar on this Sunday. They pretty much have decided that they are going to stop those ceasefire negotiations because they're saying that Israel and Hamas can't come to the same page. Is that really a surprise, though? I mean, how can you come to the same page with a terroristic organization?
Yeah. So it was thought that with the death of Sinwar, that might have removed the obstacle for coming to some type of agreement. But apparently Hamas is in such disarray that there is no one there in Hamas that is willing to take control and to be able to negotiate the hostages for peace there in the Gaza Strip. On top of that, Yoav Gallant and Netanyahu had differences in their opinions about the conduct of the war in the Gaza Strip. Now, with Yoav Gallant being fired and Israel Katz replacing him as defense minister, that gives Netanyahu the ability to go ahead and pursue his primary mission of wiping out Hamas, removing it as any type of future threat, as opposed to being forced to deal with coming to a settlement to get the hostages out. So I expect that Netanyahu really would rather pursue the total destruction of Hamas, and any obstacle to that has been removed.
I'm glad you mentioned the eradication of Hamas, Ken, because there are concerns this morning that that's pretty much a falsehood. And I bring that up because if we look back in recent weeks, we were hearing from officials out in the Middle East that there was a proposal that pretty much if there were any Hamas terrorists that had any of the captives still in their possession, that they could release them safely, and then they would be allowed to go on with their lives without any penalty. There's concern about that because obviously, one, you're negotiating with terrorists, even though the primary reason for this is to get the remaining hostages home. For some people, it seems kind of convoluted because obviously if you let a terrorist go free, they could potentially do the act again. Also, when you think about the Palestinian prisoners that are going to be released in exchange for them. So if you could provide that perspective, please, because for many people it's confusing because right here in the U.S., top of mind, we know not to negotiate with terrorists.
Sure. Palestinian prisoners that are being thought to be the ones that would be released, some of them are very active Hamas members that, if released, would once again join the fight. After all, Sinwar was one such Palestinian prisoner. He was in jail there in Israel because he had killed several Hamas members that they believed were cooperating with the Israelis. Sinwar was released in an exchange for an Israeli military member that was being held captive by Hamas. And you see that the release of Sinwar resulted in him taking over the military branch of Hamas and eventually becoming the total leader of Hamas there in the months leading up to his death. And so it's very difficult when you negotiate with terrorists. The results will often cause more terrorism in the long run. And that's the idea with Hamas, is that if you allow Hamas to continue to exist, to continue being active there in the Gaza Strip, you will eventually have to fight them once again. So better to wipe them out now than have to fight them again 10, 15 years from now after they've had a chance to reconstitute, gain more members, and attack again.
So in real time, as this fighting continues, we know Israeli airstrikes and then airstrikes from Hamas are happening in real time. What is the latest for these mediations? I just mentioned that Qatar saying that right now they are dissolving those mediations pretty much because of frustration. So does that mean it's just still at this point, or do you expect them to pick up in the coming days? A lot of people hoping this ceasefire can happen so those remaining hostages can return home safely.
Well, the Biden administration is still in charge of the United States, and it is in their interest to try to get the hostages back. And so I'm sure that they will try to renew these negotiations with Hamas through Qatar or through Egypt. And so there are other avenues to which they can try to negotiate and get those releases. But again, Netanyahu, with the removal of Yoav Gallant, he may not be interested in coming to some type of terms with Hamas. Instead, he might be more interested in wiping out Hamas. As far as Hezbollah goes, the Israelis continue their attacks in Lebanon, but they feel that they have really, really hurt Hezbollah. The new leader of Hezbollah is not a military member. He is not a person who has a strong background in the military side. And so he may be more interested in finding a solution to this problem here with Israel relatively quickly. Plus, Israel is really damaging Hezbollah's capabilities of conducting war against Israel. And so the Houthis, on the other hand, with the announcement of Trump winning the election, they are now saying that they are stepping back from their attacks on ships there in the Red Sea. And so that may take care of the Houthi problem, even though there was a week before that, the Russians were talking about providing missile systems to the Houthis. So Iran is the remaining big problem in this area. And Iran just attempted to, as we saw, was making plans to use a criminal network to assassinate Trump before the election. And so Iran remains to be the chief problem in this area, as they always have been.
Ken Gray, always a pleasure. We appreciate your candidness and thoroughness as we are following these breaking news alerts. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.